kind of like nuclear Armageddon, but on the road, where if everyone drove sports cars, then we'd all be crashing with lightweight sports cars. But then one person gets an SUV, so another person gets an SUV, and before long, we're both driving land tanks with 1,000 horsepower, and it's just ridiculous. Hey, my name is Andy, and today we're going to be doing underrated, overrated Porsche Edition. Let's go. Now, as Porsche has been around since the 1930s, I'm not going to cover every single car they've ever made. That would take way too long. We're going to cover the most iconic, most noteworthy ones, starting with the Porsche 986 Boxster. I feel that the 986 Boxster was quite overrated. It was actually co-developed with Toyota because Porsche in the 90s was going through some financial struggles and they needed a car that was going to sell en masse. So they approached Toyota to help them develop a reliable platform that would sell as a volume car. They put a lot of effort into the reliability, they put a lot of effort into the mass production of the car, but they didn't put as much time and effort into the driving dynamics. I think the Boxsters, look, they have that kind of image with them, you know the one I mean, where they've been heavily modified, just looks completely ridiculous, wrapped, stupid wheels, the whole nine. It looks cheap, and I think that actually detracts from the brand image. It served an important role in Porsche's history, but the 986 Boxster is just overrated. Moving on, we have the Porsche Boxster / Cayman 987 and newer. So when the 987 came out, Porsche decided to use the same platform for the Boxster and for the Cayman. I think the 987 and newer is actually quite a cool car because it uses a mid-engine rear-wheel drive layout when most Porsches up until that point had been rear-engine rear-wheel drive. So it had excellent driving dynamics, decent enough performance, great price point, and I think it's correctly rated. Now moving on, we have the Porsche 911. Now I'm gonna go into various different types of 911, but for this instance, I mean the regular old 911 from all of history up until now. Now I think the 911 standard car is correctly rated. It is a very popular car, but it is very popular for a reason. Porsche is known for its absolute engineering mastery, especially in the 911, because it balances performance and price very well. I don't think it's underrated because it is so numerous, and I don't think it's overrated because it is a really well put together car. So the 911 in general is correctly rated. Now the 911 Targa models, I think the 911 Targa models are actually very underrated. The ability to have a hardtop and a convertible in one car with the all glass back window that kind of wraps around, I think that is beautiful. And in fact, I think it was the Swedish police that used to use 911 Targas as police vehicles. Don't quote me on that, but I'll put the photo up here. The ability to take the roof off, I mean, what more do you want? The 911 Targa is absolutely underrated. Next, we have the Porsche 911 Turbo models. I think the 911 Turbo models are correctly rated. Actually, change that. I think they're underrated. The 911 Turbo models are underrated, and that is because it is an absolute supercar killer. It is a sleeper, it is very low key, but it is an absolute monster. And I only really found out the other day when I went to look up 911 Turbo models how expensive they actually are. They fetch a decent price, and that's for a reason. Now, I didn't even realize the kind of performance that those turbo models had until I started seeing, CarWow drag racing them against 720s and Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and it was just annihilating everything.
The Porsche did the standing quarter mile in 10.2 seconds. The Lamborghini and Ferrari both took 10.4 seconds.
With its speed and vacuum cleaner-like sound.
Wow.
Yeah, they don't sound that great, but they are an incredible car and they're absolutely underrated. Next, we have the 911 GT series cars. That's including the GT3, the GT2, and they actually made a GT1. So the GT series cars, I think they're correctly rated. They're pretty on par because you've got the performance, the driving dynamics, but I mean, they're well loved, they're well talked about, but there's nothing really that incredibly special about them. To me, they look more like an appliance. They're really practical, incredibly good at what they're designed to do, but they're not special. For me, I don't really feel a sense of occasion. Now, when you drive a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or something like that, there's more to it. And I guess maybe that's a testament to Porsche's design, but I think it is a correctly rated car. Next, we have the Porsche Cayenne. Now, the Porsche Cayenne was actually a really important car for Porsche's history. Porsche was one of the first supercar manufacturers to make a luxury sports SUV. You had people like Land Rover coming in, you had actually, you really only had Land Rover, and then Porsche came out with the Cayenne in, I think, 2000, maybe 02, around that time period. But the Cayenne was one of the first fast SUVs. It was a very important car, and that, along with the 986 Boxster, helped to reinvent Porsche through sales volume, and then they were able to create the cars we know and love today. But unfortunately, I think the Cayenne is overrated. This is just how it is in general. Why would you buy a super sport SUV for, let's say, 200, 250 grand when you can buy an equivalent sports or supercar for 200 to 250 grand, and you can get way better performance, way better fuel economy, the thing looks better, and sure, it's not as practical, but if you wanted something practical, buy a cheaper sports or supercar, and then just buy a just general SUV. Go buy a Toyota, whatever it is, because then you've got your utility, but then you get to drive something that looks and is awesome. Next, we have the Porsche Macan. Now, I think the Macan is also quite interesting because it's like a baby Cayenne. I think, again, just like the Cayenne, the Porsche Macan is overrated. You've got this big old boxy platform, and I mean, it looks great, but it's what? If you want a utility vehicle, you can get a Land Rover, you can get a Toyota, you can get anything. And the other thing people say is, well, SUVs are safer. But they're not really, because the cars and the SUVs have to have the same kind of crash safety, and they're held to the same standards. But the SUV has more mass, more metal, and is actually arguably more dangerous than if you just crashed in a sports car, which is light. And the other thing is, it's kind of like nuclear Armageddon, but on the road, where if everyone drove sports cars, then we'd all be crashing with lightweight sports cars. But then one person gets an SUV, so another person gets an SUV, and before long, we're both driving land tanks with 1,000 horsepower, and it's just ridiculous. So long story short, the Porsche Macan is overrated. Next up, we have the Porsche Panamera. Now, when this car came out, I thought it was absolutely hideous.
Stop it. Disgusting,
especially from the back. The Porsche Panamera was not a great looking car, but I like the idea of what they were doing with the car, to have a 4 to 5 seater, super saloon that could carry a lot of people in luxury and then also be ridiculously fast. I love the idea behind it. And the newer models, they actually look quite good. So I think the new Porsche Panameras are underrated, but the old Porsche Panameras were no, they were actually quite underrated too. The idea was great. Next up, we have the Porsche Taycan and the Porsche Taycan Turbo S. These cars are correctly rated. They have a lot of hype and a lot of attention around them, but it is absolutely deserved, and it is my favorite new super sports electric car. I prefer the Taycan over the Tesla Model S because it retains the Porsche DNA. You've got the driving dynamics, you've got the dramatic looks, you've got the beautiful interior. They did an incredible job with this car. But then you also have, EV capability. You've now got decent range, blisteringly fast performance. The Taycan is a great car. It definitely deserves the esteem and attention it's got, and it's a correctly rated car. Now, the Porsche 959, arguably the world's first hypercar, because this was before the Ferrari F40 and was the fastest car in the world when it came out. The 959 had revolutionary technology such as adjustable suspension. I think it was magnetic, or maybe it was hydraulic, but anyway, adjustable suspension, really clever four-wheel drive system, and they even use these cars for the Dakar Rally and other such rallies. The 959 is truly an underrated supercar. Next up, we've got the Porsche Carrera GT. I think you already know what I'm going to say about this car. Well and truly underrated. The Carrera GT is just all-time iconic V10 Le Mans engine stuffed into a mid-engine Porsche with no driving aids and a 6-speed manual transmission. This car is an all-time classic. Absolutely adore it, and it is absolutely underrated. Next up, we have the Porsche 918 Spyder. I think that the 918 is actually an underrated car because it was arguably the most advanced car from the Holy Trinity. While its looks were a little bit more subtle, I think it actually looked quite good, and the ability to switch between EV and super hypercar performance modes were just really cool. And the fact that it was a Spyder by default was just also really cool. The Porsche 918 it's an underrated car. Now, last but not least, I'm going to be reviewing Porsche as a whole, and I think as a brand, as far as whole brand goes, I think Porsche is correctly rated. It has a long, huge history to it, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to cover every single model in this video, otherwise you'd be here for about 45 years. They were always kind of like the silent achiever. They were the diligent student in school where you didn't really hear much from them, but when they came out with a car, it just showed everyone up through pure performance. Rather than boasting about it or having huge fanfare and ridiculousness, Porsche kind of just made their cars. When they released them, the performance kind of did the talking, and it's still like that to this day. Personally, I'm not like that into the brand, but I can totally see why. I mean, their PDK transmissions are one of the best out there, and I think overall Porsche is a correctly rated brand. Anyway, that's about it from me. Do you agree with my ratings? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.